F1's got yet another emergency meeting coming up April 20. The series that inspired said regulations? Well, their meeting is completely the opposite. Formula E is going to be rolling out what many liken to the Batmobile the day after. Okay, the timing of this reveal probably wasn't planned, but the timing is almost too precise to sit with comfortably. The day after F1's team principals, the FIA and Liberty Media sit in a room trying to agree how to fix a regulation that's broken 3 races into its existence, Formula E will be showcasing the 4th iteration of its car, built around the exact philosophy F1 is running away from. One championship has been in constant crisis talks for many months now. The other one, next week, is going to be throwing a party. Those are not separate stories, folks, and it really helps that this brand new Formula E car that's coming at the end of the year looks tough. The first bite is with the eye and all that. As for F1, this current rule set was meant to be a statement of intent. A near 50-50 split between combustion and electrical power, in theory, the future of racing, at least according to 2021. The pitch was that the cars would be smaller, faster on a power-to-weight basis, and that the electrical component would create new tactical dimensions without compromising the fundamental experience of watching the world's best drivers push machinery to its absolute limit. 3 races in, that pitch is under serious pressure, because drivers have been spending qualifying sessions not pushing it to the limit. Can you see the problem here? Lifting and coasting into corners, you hear time and time again from drivers that the car's electrical system, the ECU, is overriding their decisions sometimes that go against their very nature that they've been learning since karting. I think Carlos Sainz summed it up really well one qualifying session, that the harder you pushed, the slower you went. Lando Norris explained the sensation during qualifying this year is not as amazing as last year and that no track this year would ever be able to replicate it. And after the Chinese Grand Prix, Fernando Alonso likened Formula 1 these days to the Battery World Championship. And then, of course, we know about Max's Formula E on steroids quip, and then also him saying it's probably better to drive in Formula E right now since it really knows its principles, whereas Formula 1, well, it really doesn't. It really disappoints me because I liked the principle of these regulations in that it offered up more tactical solutions, but the more I keep hearing about the details that weren't told to us at the beginning of the year, when Formula 1 was really trying to sell it, it just makes me sadder and sadder. I have hope. I do think there are plenty of good things to like about the regulations, you know, chassis and aero-wise, but the powertrain, you can really tell there was a lot of political manipulation going on there. But what's particularly interesting in Max's takes on Formula E is the accidental precision of them all. He reached for Formula E as an insult, and we'll get back later in the video as to why that framing has become a lot more complicated. Because the safety dimension has made all of this harder to dismiss as sour grapes from drivers in uncompetitive cars. Franco Colapinto described the speed difference between a car deploying full electric power and one harvesting as creating a situation where it almost feels like one car is on a slow outlap and the other is at the limit on a push lap, calling the maneuvers artificial and dangerous. And we all know about the Behrman crash. I covered it yesterday, so I'm not really going to repeat myself here about it. In the here and now, part of the negotiations that are taking place right now and will reach a crescendo on April 20th are talking about ways they can adjust the powertrain and its ratios without changing the 50-50 split, at least not yet, such as negotiating and dropping energy recovery by about 1/3 per lap, as in bringing down the megajoules. Some proposals are suggesting reducing the output of the MG UK from its 350 kilowatt bases down to 300 or 250, or as low as 200. Whatever happens, the sport does need to change something before Miami, and I think even Mercedes and Ferrari recognize that something has to be done here. They can't just leave it at the vanilla version that we saw in Australia and during testing. Because yes, it's all very well and good that they're winning the championship, or at least in contention of winning it, but if it continues the sport to bleed fans, there'll be no one left to watch it. Them winning. And really, they should be making the most of this opportunity because, due to geopolitical circumstances, this sport has been offered a monumental opportunity to actually take a breather and look through the data, the FIA as well, and come up with something that isn't slapdash, that actually has some meaningful testing and information behind it, feedback from multiple sources, not just the teams who have their own interests and intents. You've got the drivers as well. Hopefully, they'll actually be listened to. And we don't hear more from Stefano saying, hey, don't bite the hands that feed you, Miladio. And Verstappen's read on all this was characteristically direct. Quote, we're a bit late with that. The amount of money that has been invested into these regulations, it'll be around for a while. You could have seen this coming, and he's right, you could have seen it coming, but what's less discussed is who could have seen it coming most clearly and why. Now here's the Formula E side of things, and if you're the kind of person that really doesn't like the idea of batteries being in motorsport, even the sight of one of these gets you into a real tizzy, just don't worry, hear me out here, it'll be okay. I will rush through this and I will explain why. I'll even hold your hand if you want. The Gen 4 car that sets to debut for the 26-27 season later this year produces 450 kilowatts in race trim and 600 in attack mode. 815 horsepower from a fully electric single-seater with 4-wheel drive. 2 distinct aero trims too, one for quali and one for the race. Packaged also with 700 kilowatts of regenerative braking. Maximum power has almost doubled from the last refresh, the Gen 3 Evo, going from 350 kilowatts to 600, while regeneration capability increases also, making the car capable of generating more power than it uses during braking phases. There are some estimates suggesting that half of the car's total power that it needs for a race could be manifested from braking alone. That is an incredibly huge advantage, because that reduces the size of the battery you actually need to store power, because you'll recoup it very quickly. There are pit stops with fast charging. That's going to only make the cars lighter, and now they're more powerful, and they look the part. Oh, okay. I mean, it took over a decade to get to where we are today, but still, that's a decade. That's really good progress. And yes, generational leaps are all well and good, but ideally, motorsport fans like to see a number. And even though many Formula E circuits are street circuits or are very short, they're not really representative to Formula 1 tracks, unless they're at testing sometimes. Monaco is the closest that you can get. And there is a point of reference that Jaguar uses, for example, from their own simulations, the exit from the Monaco tunnel. According to them, the Gen 4 car exits that tunnel at around 277 kilometers an hour. Compared to 245 for the current car, the Gen 3 Evo, and 199 kilometers an hour for the first generation car of circa 2013-14. That's simulator data, folks. It's not a marketing claim. It sounds more credible to me, don't you think? A manufacturer projecting performance based on actual architecture across 4 generations of car, on one of the most iconic and constrained circuits in the world. It pointing out the difference between Gen 1 and Gen 4 of being around 50 miles an hour. It's an official FIA World Championship, and it means that its placement within the super license points categories is even more justifiable, since it's now reaching speeds that are competitive with F3 and F2 already. It's really clear that the people behind this sport, the people that are advancing this technology, they're putting in a lot of effort. It's even possible to suggest that this series is not in any danger. It's looking really, really stable, and its own version of Drive to Survive on Amazon Prime is really gaining a lot of numbers. It's been very well received. Its CEO, Jeff Dodds, called Gen 4 the most advanced, demanding, and sustainable machine we've ever built. They're marketing the philosophy as proof of progress, whilst F1 is arguing in hotel rooms about how much of the same philosophy to remove before Miami. Now, okay, I want to be honest with you about one thing before we go any further. The Gen 4 cars have not been raced yet. That's going to be coming later in the year. What we're going to be seeing in Paul Ricard in a few days' time is nothing more than a showcase, as in, we'll just bring the cars out, we'll show a little bit of blapping the accelerator, but we're really not going to be pushing this car in anger. That's going to come later in the year with further tests. And those Monaco numbers are indeed projections. The real promise will come when they actually start racing in December when the season begins, and Formula E continues to refine the product all the way through to the first round because, well, this is a spec series. And you recall the word homologation when it comes to the F1 power units? Well, homologation for the Gen 4 cars won't come around until September, so there's still a good 3-4 months left to try and refine this product even more. And then in just a couple of years' time, we'll probably get a Gen 4 Evo, so we'll get further refinements on top of that. And then in another 2 years after that, there'll probably be Gen 5. And that could easily rival Formula 1 cars, so that'll be very interesting, also given the V8 turbo rumours around that same year. So just keep all of that in your head, folks. Things will be refined all the way through until the first practice session. But you know what? I think that actually sharpens my argument instead of dulling it. This series is on its 4th attempt at getting electric single-seater racing right. They spent more than a decade learning what this philosophy does under actual competitive conditions, iterating through hardware generations and adjusting the energy architecture every time, based on what happened in real races rather than what simulations predicted. which is exactly what happened in F1's regulation cycle and its development. In Formula 1, this is their first serious attempt at the same philosophy, and it's falling apart. The series F1 has positioned itself above is significantly further along the learning curve on this specific problem. That remains true no matter what the Gen 4 car shows. And if you really want to bring looks into the equation, that's actually one of the good things about Formula 1 2026, in that the cars, they very much remind me of the 2000s. They still look really clean, they look balanced, and they are very, very pleasing to look at with every single race. But in reality, even though I'm getting a lot of feelings of the 2000s with them, when I see that Gen 4 car, I'm not a Formula E devotee like I am with F1, but I look at that and I'm like, whoa, that looks really mean. No wonder some liken it to the Batmobile. It looks dangerous, man. I'm pretty sure that they're going to get Formula E a lot of fans based on the look of that car in of itself. Some giving it the nickname the Batmobile, likening it to one of the most iconic fictional vehicles of all time. That is a pretty impressive term of endearment, if I do say so myself. But I must point out the things that they did have in common. Mercedes had a Formula E team from 2019 through 2022, them arriving when they got their official FIA championship status. They even got a couple of world champions in Nick de Vries and Stoffel van Dorn. Yes, the Stoff. And they did all of that with the Gen 2 spec, and then they left before Gen 3 arrived. And what was Toto Wolff's explanation at the time as to why they decided to leave Formula E? Well, it was pretty cut and dry, and we pretty much accepted it, that the TV ratings and the resources they were putting into it were just not good enough. And to be fair, in comparison to Formula 1, who was on a real tear from the beginnings of Drive to Survive from 2019, it made perfect sense. Formula E couldn't hold a candle to what ratings Formula 1 could produce and the amount of tension and the money that it was getting. So all of the money spent in developing these cars and trying to understand them, it was just a drain on resources that could have been better spent to continue further domination in Formula 1. And of course, trying to compete with Red Bull during that same 2021 campaign. But it was still useful enough to try and see if they could expand Mercedes upon hybrid technology or more electrical deployment, trying to get that 50-50 split. Because they can't do full electrification, because Formula E does have exclusive rights to that for quite a few decades yet, so Formula 1 can't go all electric. But based on what we're seeing right now, it'll never go full electric. But logically, them continuing would have been dilutive, as they said. It was a corporate decision any chief financial officer would recognise and respect. It was plausible, but upon reflection, it might have also been a cover story, because as I said before, the founder of Formula E, Alejandro Agag, told Spanish newspaper Marca a different story, that the great inspirations for what is happening now in F1 are Mercedes and Toto Wolff. The man who built the original series on the record said that Mercedes used 3 seasons of works team data and development experience to architect an F1 regulation nobody else understood as well, and then ditched the sport. Indeed, no Formula 1 team had a presence within Formula E at the time. I know Audi had some influence with ABT for quite a few years. That might come into relevance in some shape or form, but only with the earlier version of cars. Certainly not to the same depth as what Mercedes was able to do with their EQ division. And Agag has very good reasons to feel agog about all of this, because, put simply, they saw Mercedes arrive in their sport, hopeful for the extra backing of such a huge manufacturer, them deciding to grace their stage and giving it a ringing endorsement, and they were competitive. They were bringing in attention. But then, after they were done with it, they just threw the sport away like a piece of rubbish or something like that. So now I can imagine that Alejandro's feeling quite smug at the moment, because Formula 1's trying to copy the same philosophy as his series, but under far more commercial pressure and fan pressure. It's significant that the person with the most direct view of what Mercedes actually did in that series looks at this year's regulations and sees extraction rather than coincidence. His verdict on what those regulations produced is equally direct. He believes that F1 2026 is not good for Formula 1. That it should be Formula 1's job to be the ultimate combustion engine championship, whilst Formula E, his one, should be the ultimate electric championship. Do you think that's fair, folks? In a way, I sort of do, but at the same time, it sounds like he's almost deriding Formula 1 as being a knockoff of his own series. Like, he's just going, this is what Formula 1 could actually come up with, inspired by us, a compromised second-hand version of his own product, shaped in the interests of only one team, and then trying to pass the buck onto the 2 other teams coming in. Seriously, We all like to think that it's Audi and Honda who are responsible for these regs, but no, Mercedes were the architects. And the results table isn't really making that harder to say either, because look at what it is right now. Mercedes are leading the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships quite handily, albeit they've made a bit of a slog of it trying to get to the top. They've not exactly had a whole bed of roses to their name. And with them supplying Alpine, McLaren and Williams, they're gathering in a huge amount of data, and it will be increasingly valuable to accelerate their knowledge of this current regulation cycle all the more. But it is worth noting that McLaren did buy the Formula E team from Mercedes and ran it through Gen 3 before withdrawing before this current season, and them not being able to find a buyer and the team folded. Whatever energy management insight they absorb there won't translate into an F1 power unit because they run a Mercedes engine. Instead, that knowledge may flow into setup philosophy and driver coaching. In contrast, Mercedes got in, won twice, built the conceptual foundation for what became this year's regulations, and left before the competition understood what had actually happened. Now, understandably, Wolff has pushed back on the idea that the regulations were designed to benefit Mercedes specifically, attributing driver criticism to competitive frustration. He also points out that the loudest voices against any drivers are the ones that are not winning. So he's basically just saying, well, you're only talking smack because you're not doing really well. That totally makes sense. You wouldn't be saying that if you were winning or competitive. And he also told other engine manufacturers who were digging into the depths of compression ratios and the like, and complaining against Mercedes being dominant, as in getting your shizzle together. Simultaneously, the most defensive response and the most revealing response available. Because this is coming from the man who understood the architecture the most, in fact maybe crafted it, and is now watching everyone catch up really quickly, and then 2 Grand Prix suddenly disappear, so he can't extend his advantage even more. Then there's Stefano Domenicali's now foolish interview he made the other day with Autosport. If he thought that was going to calm people down, it only made them angrier. 5 years ago, the manufacturers thought that the only way to progress in being involved in motorsport was trying to find the right balance between the internal combustion engine and electrification. That the regulations were built for an automotive moment that's already gone. The manufacturers who demanded them are changing or have changed their minds. The product needs fixing before the next race, and the CEO of F1 is framing all of that as evidence the sport is being managed correctly, passing the buck from themselves to the car giant. The F1 CEO also said that he could see sustainable fuel play a huge part in the future of F1, with a strong internal combustion engine and minimal electrification, which is a careful and diplomatic way of saying the current 50-50 split was a starting point the sport now needs to reverse away from. But not abruptly. It has to be done with style and make it out to the normies that this was all part of the plan. It's natural evolution of these regulations. Not a knee-jerk reaction in being told duff information or an act of incompetency or anything like that. And the current configuration, which is gaining a lot of traction, which I have talked about before, is a 2.4-litre V8 turbo with sustainable fuels, carbon neutral ideally, and maybe a little bit of hybrid technology, but nowhere near the levels of what we've had in 2026. Going back maybe to what it was during 2022 or 2025, 20-15% or something, where it's only a part of the story, it's only a slight differentiator. In theory, it's cheaper to develop, lighter to package, and significantly louder at full revs. Domenicali long ago, before he had to sell the current rules aggressively, said it plainly. Sustainable fuel on a V8? I think is great. It just shows the politics around all this are messy. Honda and Audi came into F1 specifically because of what Mercedes framed for the rules. Their entire program's built around it, so asking them to pivot to a simplified V8 by 2031 means asking them to accept an investment which brought them to the sport in the first place being superseded before they've had a full cycle to benefit from it. I mean, they might decide to go along with it depending on whether or not the automotive industry indeed is heading for simply using combustion engines with carbon neutral fuels, being able to retrofit existing cars and making costs far, far cheaper, but the political roadmap for F1 has changed twice in recent times. Ben Sulayem wanted these changes done for 2029. I mean, that was too early to do because General Motors wants to come in for 2029. 2031 seems logical, with maybe 2030 coming along if there's enough pressure or demand from the manufacturers, as in, if everyone agrees, maybe we'll do it for 2030. And Domenicali acknowledged that tension directly. That, in this moment, to have a manufacturer that invests in F1 is something incredible, which deserves our total respect. The problem is, though, that the product those manufacturers helped design is the one the sport is now sitting in emergency meetings trying to fix. And with that 2031 scenario, if it runs to completion, F1 would return to combustion as its primary identity. the electric component shrinking back into something that is just in the background. Formula E, meanwhile, would have built on the Gen 4 concept, the one with 815 horsepower, permanent all-wheel drive and whatnot, and make it better and better, with the developmental freedom that the commercial compromise in F1 would never allow. So as a result, we could have two single-seater world championships which could be competing with one another in terms of technical brilliance, completely different roadmaps, but with similar competitive pace. We would want to see these two series having a little bit of a brouhaha, them with unambiguous powertrains, and quite frankly, upon reflection, that really is how it should be. These two series deserve to exist. Formula E is really worth your time, and I do think all of the stuff and work and time that has gone into it should be credited and applauded. And the irony behind all of this is almost too pointed to say out loud to you. From the founder again, Alejandro Agag. His argument for Formula E back in the day was that electric racing deserved its own championship, its own space to develop without being forced to justify itself against combustion. What's emerging now, slowly, across emergency meetings and carefully worded press conferences, as well as a V8 pivot, is that F1 might end up proving him right. Not because Formula E won some kind of culture war or anything, but simply Formula 1 borrowed a philosophy under enormous commercial pressure and is really not handling it well. It's not coping at the moment. It's discovering that the most honest thing it can do right now is just to take the L, put the fries in the bag, and go back to what it specializes in, maybe. F1 teams and representatives will be figuring out the best way in what they can do to try and move away from full electrification or the 50-50 split in a way which looks the most dignified and will cost the least to do. And then the day after that, Formula E will fire up the Gen 4 car in front of the world's media and have a really fantastic time. That will be a moment of celebration and joy and satisfaction. The April 20th meeting, I think they'll just be glad to have come up with some kind of plan and then praying at the Miami Autodrome that fans won't hate them. Nobody planned that sequence of events, folks. But if you did want a single image of what both series represent, what next Monday and next Tuesday will represent is good enough, I reckon. So yeah, F1 wrote their current rulebook by taking notes from another series and is now trying to decide how many of those notes and pages they wish to give back. And even though the man who took them is currently leading the Drivers' and Constructors' Championship, he might still end up with egg on his face anyway, either with Formula 1 management, or the FIA, or even the Daimler boardroom, who knows. But what I do know is that you will like this video over here, and yes, I do think it will be worth your time. I'll see you over there.